You'll sign the easement, or the county will take it by Tuesday. That creek runs through our 18th fairway now. That was Vivian Crandall, president of the Pinehurst Ridge Homeowners Association, standing at the foot of my gravel drive on a Thursday in March, holding a rolled survey she had paid for and never once checked against the ground. The acreage she was talking about was mine. 62 acres of high desert benchland in the Wasatch foothills, deeded to my family before the state of Utah finished drawing its own county lines. And the creek she wanted was Sage Hollow Creek, which my great-grandfather filed water rights on in 1911, the year he dug the first ditch with a borrowed mule. My name is Walt Brenner. I'm 63 years old. For 31 years, I worked as a water rights examiner for the state engineer's office, which means I spent my whole career reading the exact kind of paper Vivian was waving at me. And I knew before she finished her sentence that she had the law precisely backward. What she did not know, what she never bothered to learn, was that the man she had decided to bully across a fence line had personally adjudicated 400 and some claims on this very drainage, and that the priority date on my water predated her entire subdivision by 90 years. So, let me ask you something before I tell you how this went. If a woman in white sneakers and a blazer, the color of a traffic cone, told you the creek your family had watered cattle from for a century now belonged to a golf course, and that you had until Tuesday to sign it away, what would you have done? I'll tell you what I did. I said, I'll look at your paperwork. And I went inside and started a folder. That folder is the reason I still own every drop. I should back up and tell you how I came to be standing on that bench at all, because it matters to everything that came after. My great-grandfather, Amos Brenner, came up the Wasatch Front in 1898 with nothing but a wagon and a habit of writing things down. He homesteaded the bench above what's now called Pinehurst Ridge, though back then it was just sagebrush and the long view east toward the peaks. The one thing that made the land worth anything was Sage Hollow Creek, a thin year-round stream fed by a spring up in the limestone. Amos filed on that water in 1911, walked it himself, marked the diversion point with an iron pin, and recorded the claim at the county seat. The priority date on that filing is March of 1911. It does more work in this story than I did. The land came down through my grandfather, then my father. Then to me, in 1994, I'd already been with the state engineer's office 4 years by then. I knew what I was holding. A man who inherits a creek usually inherits a pretty noise outside the window. I inherited a senior water right with a priority date older than the pavement, and I kept the original certificate, the field notes, and every transfer document in a fireproof box in the hall closet, because that is simply what you do with the thing your family bled for. I remember the day my father handed me that box. He was thin by then, the cancer already in him, and he carried it out to the porch and set it on the rail between us, and didn't say anything for a while. Then he opened it and took out the 1911 certificate, the original, the paper gone soft and brown at the folds, and he held it up to the light so I could see Amos's handwriting on the back, the field notes in pencil that had never faded. He said, "Walt, people are going to come for this water someday. Not in my life, maybe not in yours. The dry country always comes for the water in the end. When they do, you don't argue with them, you just show them this." He folded it back along its old creases, the way you'd fold a flag, and he put it in my hands, and he said the thing I have never forgotten. He said the loud man always thinks the quiet man is weak, and the quiet man with the paper always wins. I was 33. I thought it was just a sick man talking. I know better now. I built my house up there myself in '96, the year before my wife and I married. Her name was Carol. She taught 4th grade in the valley for 22 years and could name every wildflower on the bench by sight. We raised one daughter, Nell, in that house. And Carol planted a row of lilacs along the ditch line, because she said the water ought to have something pretty to look at on its way down. She used to walk the ditch with me every spring, the first warm Saturday, to check the head gate and clear the winter debris out of the channel. She called it our anniversary because it fell near the date we married. And she'd bring 2 cups of coffee down in a thermos, and we'd sit on the bank by the diversion box while the snowmelt came up. She knew the water better than I did in some ways. She could tell me the creek was running high, just from the sound of it through the kitchen window at night. She'd say, "Spring's coming, Walt. Listen to the creek." And she was always right. The lilacs were her idea and her work. She dug every hole along that ditch herself, 11 of them, and she watered them by hand the first 2 summers until the roots found the seep from the channel and they never needed help again. Carol died 4 years ago, in the spring. When the lilacs were just starting, Nell was 16 then. She's 20 now and home for the summer from her 2nd year at the university, studying hydrology, which still makes me set my coffee down when I think about it too long. The creek runs through all of us. That is the thing Vivian Crandall never understood and could not have because she had never had to earn anything that took 100 years to grow. Pinehurst Ridge went in below me in 2004. A developer named Garrett Crandall bought the old Sorensen Ranch at the base of the bench and built 400 homes, a clubhouse, and a gate with a code box. I didn't love it, but it wasn't my business. And the families who moved in were mostly fine. Garrett's wife, Vivian, got herself elected HOA president the year the last phase sold out, and she ran the place like a woman who had finally found a kingdom small enough to rule completely. For years, she stayed on her side of the gate. Then the golf course idea came along. And everything changed, because a golf course in high desert needs one thing more than it needs grass, and that thing was running down through my property in a ditch my great-grandfather dug by hand. The first contact was polite, which I'll give her. A letter came in February, on HOA letterhead, inviting me to a community visioning meeting about a proposed recreational amenity. I didn't go. The second letter, 2 weeks later, was less polite. It informed me that the association's master plan now designated the Sage Hollow drainage as a shared community water feature and asked me to coordinate access. I wrote back one paragraph. I told them the creek and its water were privately held under a senior appropriation, that I was not interested in coordinating access, and that any work affecting the flow would need to go through the state engineer. I dated it, I kept a copy, and I drove it to the post office so it would have a postmark. Folder, page 1. That was when Vivian came up the drive in person, on that Thursday in March, with the survey and the Tuesday deadline. I want to be precise about what she said, because she said it the same way, 3 different times over the months that followed, and the consistency turned out to matter. She said the creek ran through their 18th fairway now, as if a line drawn on a clubhouse rendering could move water that had been moving the same direction since before her grandparents were born. She said my objection was functionally a nuisance because the parcel sat within the greater Pinehurst planning area. She told me, smiling, that her husband's company had already secured the rezone and that I was the only holdout standing between the community and a world-class amenity. I listened. I said I'd look at her paperwork. Then I went inside and wrote down every word while it was fresh, with the date and the time, 2:40 in the afternoon, and I added it to the folder. Here is what I started to understand that first week, and what took me months to fully confirm. The rezone she mentioned was real. Garrett Crandall's development company had quietly petitioned the county to reclassify a band of land along the bench from agricultural to planned recreational, and the petition included my 62 acres without my signature on a single document. They had done it by listing the parcels by tax ID and asserting that the affected owners had been notified. I had not been notified, not properly, not in any way the statute would recognize. The County Planning Commission, looking at a tidy application from a known developer, had set it on the consent calendar. The thing about a consent calendar is that items pass without discussion unless someone stands up. Nobody had stood up. The rezone was scheduled to be finalized in 90 days. I'm a patient man. The work taught me patience because water law moves at the speed of glaciers, and you learn to let the record do the arguing. So I did not panic, and I did not call a lawyer to fire off threats. I did something duller and far more effective. I started building the file the way I'd built 400 files for the state, the way you build a thing you intend to win with later. I pulled my own certificate and field notes from the fireproof box. I drove to the county recorder and pulled the original 1911 filing, certified with the seal, pressed into the corner. The clerk who pulled it for me, a young woman, held it a second and said she'd never seen one this old come across the counter, and asked if it was really still good. I told her water rights don't expire. They only get abandoned, and this one never had. I pulled the chain of title showing every Brenner transfer down to me, 4 generations on 4 pages. And I pulled because I knew exactly which drawer it would be in, and exactly what to ask for, the rezone petition itself. All 60 pages, and I stood at that counter and read every line of it while the clerk went back to her work, the afternoon light coming sideways through the high windows, until I got to the page that changed everything. That is where I found the first real crack, and I'll tell you about it. But not yet, because the way I found out who Vivian really was came through my own daughter. And I want to tell that part straight. It was a Tuesday in April, the second formal escalation, when Nell came in from a run on the bench trail and said there was a man with a clipboard taking pictures of our diversion box down by the lilacs. I went down. He was wearing a high-vis vest and a lanyard with a laminated card that said Pinehurst Compliance, which is not a thing, which is a phrase someone made up and printed at an office store. He had a tape measure out and was running it along the top of the head gate, writing numbers on a form, and he didn't hear me come down the path until I was close enough to read the badge. He straightened up and gave me the smile a man gives when he's decided in advance that he outranks you. He told me he was conducting a pre-construction site assessment for the amenity district. I asked him who he worked for. He said the management company. I asked which management company, and he said the one that handles Pinehurst, as if there were only one of anything in the world and I should know it. I asked to see his authorization to be on deeded private property. He tapped the laminated card on his chest, the Pinehurst compliance card, and said the assessment was authorized at the district level. I told him there was no district. I told him this was private land, that the water he was measuring was privately held, and that he needed to leave. He looked at his clipboard the way a man looks at a map when he's lost and doesn't want to admit it, like the paper might overrule the ground he was standing on. Then he packed up his tape measure, slowly, to show me he was leaving because he chose to, and he walked back to his truck. I photographed his truck, his plate, and the fake badge while he loaded up, and I saved the images to the computer and to a second drive I kept in the same fireproof box. Incident 2, logged. The first had been the survey at the drive. I was counting. By then, I had learned to count. I called the sheriff's office that afternoon, not to file charges, but to ask a question, and a deputy named Sam Ott came out the next morning. Sam was maybe 40. Local, kind of officer who'd rather solve a thing over coffee than write it up. He came up the drive a little after 8, and I had a pot on, and he stood in the kitchen with his hat in his hand, looking at Carol's calendar on the wall, while I poured. He looked at my photos on the computer, the truck, and the plate, and the laminated card, and he shook his head, slowly. He told me something I already knew, but needed a neutral voice to say out loud. He said a private compliance officer has no authority on deeded land, that the badge was meaningless, a costume, that anybody could print one, and it would mean exactly as much as the paper it was laminated to. He said if the man came back, I should call dispatch and not engage. Then he set his coffee down and said, the part that turned out to be the most useful sentence anyone said to me that whole spring. He said, Walt, if they're going to keep this up, you want a pattern. 1 incident is a misunderstanding. 6 is a case. A judge can wave off 1. A judge can't wave off 6 with dates and photos. Write down every single one, time and day, and keep it somewhere it can't burn, and don't lose your temper at any of them. Because the minute you take a swing, the story stops being about them and starts being about you. I told him I'd been a water examiner for 31 years, and I already kept everything in a fireproof box. He looked at me a second, then he laughed. The first time he'd laughed since he came in. And he said then I was already ahead of him, and he'd just see himself out. Folder, and now a countdown. They were about to hand me one. The escalations came, like steps on a staircase, evenly spaced, each one a little steeper, and I want to walk you up them the way I live them, because the count is the whole point. Step 3 came in May. The HOA mailed me a notice of violation, an actual fine, $90, for what they called unauthorized vegetation, along a designated community corridor. The vegetation was Carol's lilacs. The corridor, I wrote a 1-paragraph response stating the parcel was not within the association and returned it certified. I kept the copy. Step 3, $90 unpaid logged. Step 4 came in June, and it had her husband's fingerprints on it. A title company sent me a letter offering to purchase a water easement across my property for the sum of $1 in exchange for, and I am quoting the letter, release from all current and future community assessments. It was a bribe dressed as a real estate transaction, and it was sloppy because the letterhead listed the buyer as a limited liability company. And when I looked the LLC up on the state business registry that night with Nell reading the screen over my shoulder, the registered agent was Garrett Crandall, and the business address was the Pinehurst Clubhouse. Nell saw it before I did. She had her finger on the screen on the registered agent line, and she said, Dad, that's her husband. That's the developer. Then she scrolled down and found the rest. 3 more LLCs registered to the same clubhouse address. All of them formed within a month of each other that spring. All of them with names that sounded like nothing. Ridgeline Holdings and Benjaminity Partners, and one just a string of letters. We sat at the kitchen table and pieced it together, while the coffee went cold. That was the night the shape of the thing came clear. This was never about a fairway. A golf course, with a guaranteed senior water right attached to it, is worth a great deal more than a golf course hoping to buy water on the open market every dry year. They didn't want my creek for the view. They wanted the priority date. They wanted the one thing Amos Brenner had filed in 1911. Because in a drought, and we are always eventually in a drought, the oldest right gets watered first, and everyone junior to it goes dry. A junior right in a bad year is a promise nobody can keep. A senior right is water. In the bank. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen a while, listening to the creak through the window the way Carol used to. Then I made fresh coffee and added the letter to the folder. Step 4. Now I knew why. Nell asked me that night if we were going to lose the creek. She was standing in the doorway in Carol's old cardigan, which she'd taken to wearing, and her voice did the thing it had done at the funeral. I told her the truth, which is the only thing I've ever told her. I said no. I said the law was on our side and older than their golf course, and that the trick was going to be making them say their wrong thing out loud, in public, in front of someone with the authority to recognize it was wrong. She asked how I could be so sure. I told her about the priority date, about 1911, about the iron pin her great-great-grandfather drove into the bank that is still there if you brush the grass back. She went down with a flashlight that same night and found it. She came back in, with mud on her knees and her eyes bright, and said, "It's really there. It was really there. It had been there the whole time." Step 5 was the lawsuit filed in July. The association sued me in district court for what they called tortious interference with a community development plan, seeking an injunction to compel the easement. It was a garbage filing, the kind a lawyer writes when his client has more money than patience. But a garbage lawsuit still has to be answered, and answering it cost me $4,000 to retain a quiet land use attorney named Dahl, who I'd known professionally for years. Dahl was past 70, half retired, and he kept his office above a hardware store in the valley with a window that looked at the mountains. I brought the folder in and set it on his desk, and he put on his reading glasses and went through it page by page, slowly, not talking, for the better part of an hour. He read the 1911 certificate. He read the certified mail logs. He looked at Nell's video of the excavator twice. Then he took his glasses off and looked up and asked me the only question that mattered. He asked whether the water right had ever been challenged or forfeited, whether anyone had ever filed against it, or whether the creek had ever gone a season unused, because a water right in this state is a use it or lose it thing, and the one way they could beat me was abandonment. I told him it had been continuously used and never abandoned, that I had photographs of the ditch running every single year, going back 2 decades, irrigation records. The lilacs themselves as living proof the seep had never stopped, and that the state's own records listed the right active and in good standing. He set the folder down and was quiet a moment, and then he almost smiled, which I gathered he didn't do often. He said, "Walt, in 40 years of land use work I have never said this to a client. They have sued the one man in the county who keeps better records than the county does. Step 5, $4,000. Logged and answered. While the lawsuit ground along, the rezone hearing crept closer. And this is where I have to tell you about the crack I found in the petition back in April, the one I'd been holding. When I read all 60 pages at the recorder's counter, I'd found the affidavit of notice, the sworn statement that all affected property owners had been informed of the rezone. It was signed by Vivian Crandall, in her capacity as association president, and notarized. She had sworn, under oath, that I had been notified. I had not been. I had the certified mail logs proving the only things they'd ever sent me, and not one of them was the statutory rezone notice. She had put her name on a false affidavit to keep me off the consent calendar. That is not an HOA, being pushy. That is a sworn document containing a false statement, and it sat in the county's own file, waiting. I did not run to anyone with it. I'm a water examiner. You don't spend your best card on a skirmish. You wait for the room where it ends the war. The room was the county commission chambers, and the date was the 2nd Tuesday in September, the final public hearing on the rezone before it became permanent. I marked it on the calendar in the kitchen, the one Carol always kept, and under that Tuesday, I wrote one word: Creek. Nell saw it and didn't ask. She understood by then. The summer's last escalation, Step 6, came in August, and it was the one that stopped being administrative and crossed cleanly into something else. I came back from town on a Friday afternoon with a load of fence posts in the truck bed and heard the equipment before I saw it, a diesel knock carrying up the bench where the only sound is usually wind and water. I came over the rise, and there it was. A small excavator parked at my diversion box, and two men with a cutting torch working at the iron headgate my grandfather had set in concrete. The torch was throwing sparks against the gray iron, and one of them had a pry bar in the joint. They were attempting to physically divert Sage Hollow Creek into a new channel, graded toward the development, a raw cut already scraped into the bench above the lilacs. They had a work order on Pinehurst Amenity District letterhead, and no permit from the state engineer, no court order, nothing but Vivian's certainty that the land was functionally hers. Nell was home. She'd seen them arrive and had already done exactly the right thing. The thing I would have told her to do if there'd been time to tell her anything. She'd called the sheriff first, given them the address and the plate, then started recording from the upstairs window where they couldn't see her, steady, narrating the time and date under her breath the way I'd taught her, without ever really meaning to teach her. And she'd saved the video to 2 places before I ever got up the drive. My daughter, 19 years old, had built the evidence file standing at a bedroom window, while 2 men with a torch tore at a 100-year-old headgate. Carol would have wept. I have watched that video more times than I will admit, not for the men, but for my girl's voice, calm and low and certain, saying the date. I did not shout at those men. I want you to understand that because the temptation was a living thing in my chest, a heat that started behind my breastbone and wanted out. I parked the truck across the mouth of the drive so the excavator couldn't leave, and I walked down with my hands open and loose, and I told them level that they were altering a state-regulated waterway without authorization and trespassing on deeded land, and that the sheriff was already coming. The foreman, a heavy-set man with a sunburned neck, held up the work order the way the fake inspector had held up his clipboard, as if the paper could win the argument for him, as if Pinehurst Amenity District meant anything at all. He said they were authorized. I said by whom. He said the district. I said there is no district. There is a woman with a golf course rendering, and you are about to be the man holding the torch in the photographs. He looked at the torch in his own hand. Then Deputy Ott's truck came up the drive with the light bar going, and the foreman's certainty drained out of his face the way water leaves a cracked tank. Sam got out, took in the torch, the headgate, the work order, the raw channel cut into the bench, and me standing with my hands open. He told the crew to shut the equipment down and step away from the structure, and they did. Fast. He took the work order as evidence. He photographed the cut they'd already started on the 100-year-old headgate, the bright scar in the old iron. And he turned to me, away from the crew, and said it low so only I could hear. That's 6, Walt. That's a case. Step 6. The staircase was complete. They had walked all the way up it on their own, every step, and the last one put a cutting torch in a man's hand on my land in front of a camera. The reveal did not happen at my gate, or at the headgate, or in a phone call. It happened in the county commission chambers on the 2nd Tuesday of September, in front of 5 elected commissioners, a county attorney, a recording clerk, 2 reporters from the Valley paper, and about 60 residents of Pinehurst Ridge who had come expecting to celebrate the approval of their golf course. I sat in the 3rd row with my folder on my knees and Nell beside me. Doll sat to my left, Vivian sat in the front in a magenta blazer with a binder of her own, next to a man I took to be Garrett, and she did not look back at me once. The chair opened the item. A planner read the Rezoned summary and recommended approval. Then the chair asked the standard question, the one that exists precisely for moments like this and is almost never used. He asked if any affected property owner wished to be heard. I stood up. I gave my name. I said I was the owner of record of the 62 acres listed in the petition as parcels 7 through 9, and that I had never been served notice of the rezone. There was a small stir. Vivian turned then. The chair asked if I had documentation. I said I did. I walked to the podium, and I did the quietest thing I have ever done in a loud room. I did not make a speech. I laid 3 documents on the clerk's table, where the commissioners could see them on the overhead. The first was my certified water. Right priority date March 1911, recorded with the county seal, 93 years senior to the subdivision. The second was the Rezoned petition's own affidavit of notice, sworn and notarized, attesting that I had been informed. The third was my certified mail log. Every item the association had ever sent me, with not one statutory notice among them. I said only this: the petition swears I was notified. I was not. The affidavit is false, and the water they have rezoned for a golf course was appropriated under state law in 1911 and has never been forfeited. It cannot be rezoned away from me because zoning does not move water rights. Only the state engineer does that, and the state engineer is me, or was, for 31 years. The county attorney asked to see the affidavit. He read it. He read my mail log. He leaned to the chair and spoke quietly, and the chair's face changed the way a man's face changes when he realizes the tidy thing on his consent calendar is now a problem with his name near it. He asked Vivian Crandall to approach. He asked her, on the record, whether she had signed the affidavit of notice. She said she had. He asked whether she had personally confirmed that all listed owners were served. She started to say the parcel was functionally within the planning area, and the county attorney cut her off and asked the question again, just the words: had she confirmed service, yes or no? The room was so quiet, I could hear the recorder's clock. She said finally that she had assumed the management company handled it. The county attorney said that was not what the affidavit stated. The affidavit stated she had personal knowledge, and then he said the sentence that ended it. He said the commission could not act on a petition supported by a false sworn affidavit, and that the matter was referred to the county attorney's office for review. Here are the 2 numbers I want you to hold side by side, the way I held them walking out of that room. 93 years. That is how long my family's water right had been senior to the thing they tried to take it for. That is how many valid notices they ever sent me. The gap that turned Vivian's signature into a referral, and the referral into the end of everything she'd built, her year-around 93 years of clean record against 0 notices. You could stand in that room and point at both. I did not gloat. I gathered my 3 pages off the clerk's table and I sat down, and Nell put her hand on my arm, and we listened while the chair tabled the rezone indefinitely. The document spoke. I didn't have to. The consequences fell over the following months, and they fell, every one of them, on the scheme's own machinery rather than on anything I did. The county attorney's review of the false affidavit became a formal inquiry, and an inquiry into a sworn document is not a thing a person walks away from with an apology. Garrett Crandall's development company had borrowed against the golf course as an approved, water-secured amenity. The whole financing rested on a single assumption written into the loan documents, that the course would have senior water. And when the rezone collapsed and the water right was confirmed senior and untouchable and mine, that assumption fell out from under the loan. The bank called the note. The course was never built. The grading they'd scraped into the bench washed out over the winter and went back to sagebrush. The clubhouse rendering, with its 18th fairway, laid over my creek, came down off the sales office wall, and the lot where the pro shop was going to stand is still just dirt and a survey stake. Vivian resigned the HOA presidency in November, not with a statement, not with a speech, just an empty chair at the next meeting, and her name scratched off the agenda. The lawsuit against me was dismissed with prejudice, which means they can never bring it again, and Dahl recovered my $4,000 in fees from the association down to the dollar. The fake compliance officer turned out to be a part-time landscaper named Reyes, who agreed to a written statement once he understood the laminated badge had put him within reach of a felony, and he signed it the same afternoon, relieved, I think, to be on the right side of it. The excavator crew's foreman did the same. Every one of them, when faced with the actual law, instead of Vivian's certainty, stepped back toward it like men stepping back from a ledge. The defector, if you want to call him that, was a man named Pratt, who'd sat on the HOA board and voted against me every time. Until the night in late October when he showed up at my door after dark with a manila envelope of his own and rain on his shoulders. He stood on the porch and wouldn't come in. Inside the envelope were the board minutes from a closed session, where Vivian had stated, in her own recorded words, that the golf course did not pencil without the senior water, and that the rezone was the way to acquire it without paying for it. He said he couldn't stomach having put his hand up for it once he understood it was theft with a notary stamp, that he'd told himself for months it was just procedure, and that he couldn't tell himself that anymore. I added his envelope to the folder, the last page, and I thanked him. And I did not say I told you so, because the minute said it better than I ever could. He went back down the drive in the rain, and I never saw him at the gate again. The state engineer's office, my old office, formally reconfirmed the priority date that winter. March 1911. The same date Amos filed. The same date Nell had knelt in the mud to find the iron pin for. Nothing about it had changed in 93 years. It had been the answer the whole time, sitting in a fireproof box in my hall closet, waiting for someone to stand up in the right room and lay it on the table. I want to end where the water does. Late that fall, after the cameras and the lawyers were done, Nell and I walked the ditch line together, the way Carol and I used to. The lilacs were bare for the season, but the creek was running, the way it has run every year since before any of us, clear and cold over the gravel, past the iron pin, down toward a golf course that would never exist. Nell crouched at the diversion box and put her hand in the water and said it was colder than the valley. I told her it always is, up here, where it comes out of the limestone. She's going to inherit this someday, the certificate and the field notes and the fireproof box. And she already knows what they're worth, which is the only inheritance that matters. We stood there until the light went gold on the peaks, and then we walked back up to the house. Carol and I built, and the water kept going down the hill behind us, doing the one thing no clipboard ever stopped it from doing. So here's the lesson, plainly because somebody told me once that you should always leave people with the thing they can actually use. If you own land, find your deed and read it, all of it, and find out what rights ride with it, especially water. Because in the dry country, water is the whole ball game and most people never check. Go to the county recorder and pull your own chain of title, certified, and keep it somewhere fireproof and keep the original of anything older than you are. When a letter comes that you don't like, do not answer it angry, and do not throw it away. Answer it once, in one paragraph by certified mail, and keep the copy and the postmark. Write down every incident with a date and a time while it's fresh. And save your photos to 2 places. If someone with a clipboard tells you a parcel is functionally part of their jurisdiction, that word functionally is doing the work a fact should be doing. And it means they have not checked. Make them check. Make them say the wrong thing on the record and bring the record that proves it, and let the document do the talking so you never have to raise your voice. The prepared owner wins slowly and completely. The loud one loses fast. If you've got a story like this, an HOA, or a permit office, or a clipboard that tried to take something that was lawfully yours, put it in the comments. I read them, and there are more of these than you'd ever believe. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one, because next time I'm going to tell you about the retired land surveyor, 2 valleys over whose HOA painted a new property line down the middle of his pasture overnight, not knowing he still had the original government section corner buried under his fence post, and what happened the morning he dug it up in front of the county. Until then, read your deed, walk your boundary, keep the folder.